Dan uses his excellent attention to detail to sell cars in New York, where he consistently achieves the title of Salesperson of the Month. Enjoying a low-key, serene lifestyle, he looks forward to spending his anniversary with his wife on a special trip, Jessica. The 3 children of the couple are Nina, Kyle, and the youngest, Maxie. Stress in the home is caused by Nina and Kyle's regular butting heads. Dan feels especially annoyed by Kyle's constant gaming and advises him to go outside instead. His worries are compounded by Nina's decision to change her degree in college as a result of her boyfriend's influence. Dan tries to mentor them, but his words are ignored. Kyle is sly enough to keep up a covert streaming setup at a friend's house to play video games without interruption, and Nina, standing her ground and rejecting her father's guidance, sees herself as a grown-up. The parents are looking forward to their yearly trip to the carnival, but beyond their usual routines, Jessica finds herself yearning for more spontaneity and excitement. Following an exciting ride, Dan pledges to add even more uncertainty to their upcoming adventures. Unexpectedly, someone purposefully takes a picture of them kissing, breaking their moment of love. The person posts the picture online, teases Dan, and demands to know what he plans to do about it as this invasion of privacy gets worse. The man calls Jessica fugly and spills his slushie on Dan, making the situation worse. Dan turns away in spite of the disrespect and provocation. He rejects violence, and Jessica claims she didn't want Dan to fight the boys, but she still feels let down by her husband on the inside. He can't stop thinking about the confrontation at home, and he feels like he has to hold back. Jessica uses boxing as a release, and through an unintentional punch to her opponent, she forges an unexpected connection over smoothies. Jessica confides in her new travel agent friend Gwen, expressing her experience of being stuck. Although she values Dan's skills as a husband and father, she finds it annoying that he is happy with their current situation. While Dan and Max are out shopping, they see a suspicious-looking man who appears to be observing Dan. Dan responds quickly but carefully when the man moves to launch an assault. Dan easily neutralizes the intruder by deftly thwarting his advances, even with Max by his side. Even Dan's neighbors have noticed something odd about him, which has startled the locals. Dan opens a hidden box at home that holds cash, old passports, and firearms. Concerned, Dan calls his old friend Augie to set up a new identity for his family, letting him know they're in danger. Augie tells Dan to leave as quickly as possible because she believes that McCaffrey, Dan's former supervisor, is the source of the threat. It turns out that Dan has been hiding from his family that he was once an assassin. It's highly probable that McCaffrey found him because to the carnival image. When Dan approaches Nina during an editing meeting, he finds 3 months ago, she resigned. Her friend sells her out after offering a little inducement. He discovers Nina beneath the bleachers, feeling disappointed that she gave up on her desire. However, they must hurry to get her brother from the chess club, so they cannot linger on this. But Dan is unhappy to find him, along with his game setup, at their neighbor's house. Dan informs his children that they are traveling to Vegas with caution. Dan convinces Jessica to take the impromptu vacation she has been longing for in the middle of her workday. She changes her early doubts to excitement about going. However, McCaffrey's men are waiting for them as they prepare to exit the parking lot. Dan deftly dodges the obstruction as the bus goes through. Dan is caught up by them in a minute, but not before he maneuvers around without his family noticing. It's difficult to flee when a satellite is tracking you. Dan drives into his office and locks the doors behind the assailants. After that, he raises the automobile and locates the tracker. The assailants miss him and his car because he hides in time. The family is still in the dark. Dan instructs his coworker to take the automobile for a drive on the highway after installing a tracker on it. The attackers accept the bait. His wife and children are tweeting and commenting about their vacation with 33 hours remaining. Dan takes everyone's phone in order to stay incognito. It's a trip without electronics. The only issue is that they are unsure of how to get there. Following yet another small enticement, the travel agency clerk locates maps for their route. For the first time in a long time, their family is truly becoming closer. McCaffrey, meanwhile, witnesses Dan's home firsthand and is certain that his family is still in the dark. At some time, one of them will make a mistake. Meanwhile, Kyle is having a conversation with his sister when a stranger knows him from his streaming work and requests a photo. Dan chooses to keep driving in order to escape being discovered after he notices Kyle and the girl taking pictures and realizes McCaffrey will soon be after him. More men were employed by McCaffrey to find Dan, and he fleetingly spots 3 of them. He puts music on all of his family's headphones while they are fast asleep and gets ready to employ deadly force. Even though his mirror is damaged, he is still able to remove one. His family is still asleep, just avoiding a crash and bobbing into one of them. To be honest, his family is among the most restless sleepers I have ever encountered. The third person takes off. Dan finally shuts his eyes after a night of driving, but his family is still awake. Nina fights her way into viewing the college she wants to attend, which is a half-mile distant, a beautiful location with lots of activities. Jessica also displays her keg stand abilities. Even Nina discovers that badass. Nina's boyfriend Trevor attends this college, which is one of the main reasons she wanted to visit the campus. Dan thinks the German man he saw on his phone during a university tour could be a McCaffrey operative. However, Dan discovers his error when someone else attacks him out of the blue. In the chemistry lab, they get into a fight, and after a brief altercation, Dan renders his attacker unconscious. Soon after, he moved on and rejoined his family. However, Nina visited Trevor. He is cheating on her. She discovers. She comes back crying, and Dan gives her a martial arts technique that she applies to Trevor. This helps her feel a lot better and increases her appreciation for her family. Returning to the family becomes even closer on the drive, and as Nina is driving, she expresses her gratitude to Dan for his unwavering support and considers regaining her editorial job at school. Parents were able to unwind in a little motel. Jessica is enamored with Dan's impulsive nature. She senses that there is a difference in him. Dan gives Augie a call. He is en route to give Dan and his family their new identities. The fact that he hasn't told them yet is the main issue. Then, slyly, he reappears the phone he took and makes an effort to get ready for the talk. When Kyle joins him, they finally discuss his stream, which he is proficient at, almost expertly. He desires to demonstrate it to Dan during laser tag. They placed a wager first to 3 fatalities. Dan should have no trouble with this because, as an ex-assassin, he receives both the first and second tags. After that, Dan wins the final one while Kyle responds with 2 of his own. Although Kyle feels duped, they become more intimate. When they finally make it to Las Vegas, they check into one of the best suites in town, but not before Dan has to dash downstairs. Upon meeting Augie, he receives their new IDs as well as a one-way ticket to Vancouver for a steep price. Naturally, Dan gets ready while the kids watch Max in anticipation of telling Jessica the truth during a romantic supper. Dan, not that they'll listen, but advises them not to leave the suite at all. Dan's whereabouts is already known to McCaffrey's men. As a well-known player, Kyle visits the HyperX gaming arena, where he meets Valkyrie and receives recognition. Even though McCaffrey's men are on them too, she allows him to play for her team in the Valorant finals. As Nina grows accustomed to one of the players who offered Kyle their place, Kyle is crushing the opposition team by himself. Dan attempts to be honest with Jessica, but she keeps interrupting him. So, he decides to put it off a little longer and go gambling with her, although eventually makes the decision to see how the kids are doing. Although when his call is not returned, they climb back up. Dan feels more at ease when Jessica is tricked into believing they are sleeping by dummies. Jessica gets dressed, puts on some romantic music, and diffuses some love mist. That's precisely when McCaffrey's men make their move. Dan shoots and tosses vodka, disarming the attackers and setting them on fire, but Jessica is captured. Dan sets down his firearm but stealthily snatches a knife, but Jessica has a sad conclusion when the attacker calls Dan and Sean. Dan also neutralizes the person while he's yapping. Jessica discovers the dummies as she rushes to the children. Since Kyle has only been talking about HyperX, she is aware that they must search there. But to be honest, they ought to have employed a slightly improved gameplay due to Kyle's garbage. Nevertheless, he ends the game with 30 kills. Their parents come and fetch them up right after the game finished. When Dan eventually admits that he is a hidden assassin and that his former coworkers are out to get him, the kids don't believe him. That is, until they are shot at. Taking refuge behind a vehicle, her vest keeps her alive even after Dan neutralizes her. They then play a brief round 2. Dan at last admits that he has killed 42 people and that he was McCaffrey's hired gun. Kyle believes that Dan is a hypocrite, and they now know why Dan is so opposed to social media and has never wanted to leave the city. He presents their new identities to them. Nina is currently Van is Molly and Kyle. Like a car, he has lied for 18 years, and the family still won't accept him. Jessica is going to be taking care of the kids and is leaving him, while Dan is left to watch outside till the wee hours of the morning. She phones Gwen to seek for assistance. Jessica simply tells Dan to make it safe and keep away from them, even though he tries to explain that it's not safe that McCaffrey would come for them. It appears that Gwen is a really strong lady when Jessica shows there, and it wouldn't surprise me if she collaborates with McCaffrey. Gwen talks about her ex-boyfriend who moved on and started a new life with a grumpy woman. She became friends with her and waited, considering that she fell into her trap. Jessica has indeed been duped. Unexpectedly, McCaffrey has arrived. Dan receives a call from McCaffrey indicating that his family is in captivity. He sets up a meeting at a deserted motel. There are henchmen for McCaffrey everywhere. It must flatter Dan. When McCaffrey arrives at the penthouse and begs for a mocking embrace, it seems that he is Dan's father. How come? Because Dan had abandoned him. McCaffrey desired Dan's death, but Dan had wasted every man McCaffrey had thrown his way over the last 2 days. His dad desires his return. How much more twists will this have? He will let Dan go if he returns to work for him. His family will perish if he refuses. Dan is forced to accept and does as well execute it. The kids' values suddenly dawn on them. Even though they just wanted to break things off with Dan, they now want Jessica to stand up for him. Kyle hits elevator buttons like a child. As the children attempt to convince their mother that they cannot leave Dan behind, Jessica begins to change Max's diaper and shoves it in the villain's face, causing him to fall to his death. They're going to go rescue their dad. Gwen ignores the IT guy and uses her feminine charm to woo Dan back into her love while McCaffrey heads to make some arrangements. She knows how Dan works. The household exists to rescue him. The tech guy is kidnapped as he puts Gwen to sleep. Dan expresses regret for hiding things from Jessica and pledges to always be honest with her. He aspires to be a devoted husband and parent. McCaffrey detects a problem in the interim. Kyle's fan, by the way, is the tech man. When Kyle tests the drone, he discovers that Dan is a very skilled technologist. The henchmen are on their way. Kyle will be his eyes and ears as he advises his family to travel to the roof, where he will take care of them. Using the drone, Kyle locates McCaffrey's men and provides information to Dan, who utilizes his superior strength to deal with them. In order to identify the family, McCaffrey wakes Gwen up after noticing that the drone is helping Dan. Dan begs his father to cancel, but he ignores him and nobody hits Dan despite 10 men firing automatic guns at him. As the elevator rises, Jessica hides the children and fires, while Gwen stays to the left and is uninterested. Knowing that Jessica has the upper hand in hand combat, Gwen makes fun of her and shows no respect for her. There are still guys. According to Kyle, with good communications, Dan shoots them one by one since it makes no sense to employ someone who can shoot straight. McCaffrey is at least pleased with himself after taking down the drone. In the meantime, throughout the protracted conflict, Gwen triumphs, burying Jessica behind a mountain of debris. Dan is knocked down by McCaffrey and gets a clear shot at him, but he needs to complain about how weak his family is as created him. Jessica manages to lift up the rubble and corner the kids as Gwen is cornering them, but she is still tossed around like a bag of potatoes. After Dan extracts ammunition from McCaffrey's gun, they switch to stick-and-hand fighting. Jessica musters her inner power, picks up a bamboo staff, and attempts an athletic leap, failing spectacularly. It's hilarious to Gwen, who believes Jessica is trying again, but this time she throws it, killing her. In hand-to-hand battle, McCaffrey overwhelms Dan and prepares to put an end to it by pulling out a gun loaded with bullets. However, when the family suddenly appears, Nina says that they don't despise him and says that family is and her grandfather is the most significant thing in her life. That gave Dan enough time to accomplish that. When the family does get together, the police are waiting to welcome them after 6 months. Nina rose to prominence as a reporter. Dan currently has a security company where he trains clients to defend themselves, and he even hires Augie. Kyle is still streaming, and Jessica works as a coach. The family loads up a rented RV for a cross-country road trip intended to get Nina to Stanford as they get ready for a significant adventure. The end.